Let's move on. We've got a fantastic speaker for the third session this morning. Our final speaker this morning is Mike SNEE. Mike is a hugely talented hockey executive with experience in both amateur hockey and the NHL. He was named College Hockey Incorporation Executive Director back in 2012, and in this role he leads marketing efforts to promote Division I men's college hockey, and is working to help grow the numbers of institutions offering the sport. Mike is also a member of the USA Hockey Board of Directors and serves on USA Hockey's Junior Council. He is also a member of the US Hockey Hall of Fame Board of Directors, and his presentation has a very intriguing title, Minnesota, Unintentionally Inspired by Finland. Please welcome Mike SNEE.
Sergio, thank you very much. Thank you. That was an interesting time to pause at the end of a member of the Hall of Fame pause board of directors. So I am not a member of any Hall of Fame, but for a split second there, it sounded like I was. So that was pretty cool. I'm going to tell you the goal of this event. And Aaron Wilbur from the coaches site and I go way back. The coaches site is a big supporter of my profession, College Hockey Inc. And we talk a lot about, less about coaching, but more about why kids play hockey and why they keep playing hockey, and how, even though it's the same game, it's 3 periods, it's 60 minutes, it's put the puck in the net, depending on where you come from, the structure that you play hockey in can vary. And that's the topic that Aaron and I talk a lot about. We don't talk much about edge work or how to use the bumper on the power play and the other types of typical coaching stuff. So Aaron approached me and said, you know, we talk a lot about you being from Minnesota, and now you have this job where you really get to peek behind the curtain with hockey throughout North America for sure, and even the world. Would you want to come over to Finland and talk about it? And when he brought that up, and then when he specifically said it would be in Tampere, I'm a bit of a hockey nerd, and the opportunity to come here to Finland and specifically to come to this community was something too good to pass up. So I said, okay, I will figure out a way to come up with the story, with a presentation, just so I can come and see this city. Read about it, certainly aware of not only this country, but this community's role within this country. So I want to thank Aaron for giving me this opportunity to come up with something so that I can come here. So hopefully in 43 minutes when I'm done, you feel like this was valuable and worth your time. But my main goal is to thank you on behalf of people in Minnesota that are doing their best to take something that's pretty good, preserve it, and more importantly, make it even better. All right, so spoiler alert, the whole point of this presentation is to thank, I guess, Finland, because this is where we are, but I'll throw in Sweden and these organizations that we, on behalf of people in Minnesota, are inspired by, okay? But first off, and as you heard in the introduction about who I am, and this isn't about me, but I'll let you know who I am. My name is Mike SNEE, and I work for an organization called College Hockey Inc. I have a very cool job. I have a very easy job. My job is to sell NCAA hockey. And as you just saw from Coach Woodcroft and from Kara, Princeton, Vermont, they put something pretty special out there. It is very special. It's very unique within the world of hockey. It's spectacular. And our organization's job is to advocate for it, to promote it, to introduce it to families, players that may not know everything about what we call college hockey. I think over here it might be referred to more often as NCAA hockey. It's a 12-year-old organization. It's a nonprofit. It's wonderful. It's a great job. However, today I'm on vacation. I'm literally on vacation. What Aaron asked me to speak about today wasn't my current employer. It was my previous employer in the place where I live. So prior to getting this role with College Hockey Inc. 10 years ago, I had the good fortune to be the executive director of Minnesota Hockey, which is the governing body for youth and amateur hockey in the little state of Minnesota, which is where I'm from. I'm a native of Minnesota. So to get that role was also quite special because I was born and raised in Minnesota, and in particular, I was born and raised in northern Minnesota. So I wasn't born in the Helsinki of Minnesota, I was born in the Tampere of Minnesota, and that's something that we're pretty proud of if you're from the northern part of the state of Minnesota. I'm a coach. I love coaching young players, usually 12 and under. I've been a coach for 20 years. I think he's here. It's Bob Mancini. I haven't seen you yet, but where's Bob? Bob's over there. So Bob Mancini with USA Hockey has become a good friend. He probably doesn't know it, but he's a bit of a mentor. He said one of the most important things to me as a wannabe coach, and I'm a wannabe coach, I'm not really a coach, but he said to me one time that a good coach, I was coaching 6-year-olds, all right, and trying to hurt them, and you've probably been there before, trying to get them to do what you want to do, and they're not doing what you want them to do. And he said, a good coach, if a kid gets down and wants to make a snow angel, a good coach lets him do it. I thought, that's pretty cool. And then after that, he said, and a great coach gets down and does it with them. And I don't even know if you remember saying that, but that stuck with me. That was early on. And I've now used that over and over when I'm trying to talk to other people who I'm coaching with. So I have a passion for coaching, but trust me, if we lined all of us up in this room in coaching pedigree, I'd be at the end. Okay, so I'm not a coach. My presentation is not about coaching. Side note, my 11th birthday was one of the biggest days in hockey in our country. I turned 11 on the day that USA beat Finland. Jari Kurri and that amazing team back in 1980, almost as big as an upset of beating the Soviet Union 2 days prior, and the USA won gold medal. 12 of those players were from the state I'm from, Minnesota. Many of them were from my little corner of the state up by Duluth. 11, I think, is like the perfect age. You're old enough to kind of get it, but young enough to just understand the mystery and the magic of it all. And that happened on my 11th birthday. And that was pretty impactful that day, just remembering what that was like and what that did for hockey for me. So that's who I am, and that's why I'm here, and I want to emphasize I'm on vacation today because I'm here to talk about Minnesota in particular. So it's one of 50 states. As I've been preparing for this, when I arrived here 2 days ago, I've asked a few people, hey, what do you know about states? What states are you aware of? And some are like, I don't really know, which I get, because I can't tell you the Finnish provinces. But when people have said it, they've almost always said Texas, California, Florida, okay? Those are 3 of the 50 states. Minnesota's one of the 50 states. Not one person ever said Minnesota. All right, so it admittedly is, it's like to the states what I am to coaching. It'd be near the end of the line, okay? It's one of 50 states, not very big. One of 59 people in the entire United States is from Minnesota, so you won't run into many people from the U.S. that are from Minnesota. But, like every place, we've got some cool things that we're proud of. It's super cold. It's the coldest state in the United States behind Alaska. It's the furthest north state, not surprisingly, behind Alaska. It's got a ton of lakes, which is cool because in the winter they all turn into ice rinks. So a lot of free hockey. It's a wonderful music state. I put this up here only because whenever I get a chance, and Aaron should be forewarned, if you give me a microphone, I'm going to talk about the Replacements. I love music as much as I love hockey. Most of you probably never heard of the Replacements. If you like music, Google it right now, listen to some afterwards. I'm a huge fan of that band, and they're from Minnesota, so the Replacements. And also a SNEE family vacation. My parents didn't spend a lot on vacations. They took us to the largest ball of twine, which in the world is located in Minnesota. So a pretty proud thing to have in our state, okay? So those are some fun facts about Minnesota. I think some either funner facts, and funner's not really a good word, or it's not really a word, but these facts are more fun than the previous facts, and these are all related to hockey. I'm biased because I'm from there, but Minnesota is the top hockey state in our country. Only 10% of the players come from Minnesota, but we over-index in every single measurement. So the output that we get from those 10% is sky high. 1 out of 5 men that play Division I college hockey are from Minnesota. 1 out of 3 women that play women's college hockey are from Minnesota. So 1 out of 59 women in our country are from Minnesota, but 1 out of 3 that play college hockey are from Minnesota. And 23% of Americans in the National Hockey League, so close to 1 out of 4 Americans in the National Hockey League are from Minnesota. And my parents also took me to the largest hockey stick. It was a different vacation. I think when I was 10, it was the ball of twine, and when I was 11, it was the largest hockey stick in the world. That too is in Minnesota, all right? But the most fun fact I thought everybody here was gonna be from Finland. I found out not everybody here is from Finland at the event today, but Minnesota, and I'm not making this up, Minnesota is the U.S.'s Finland, all right? Literally, almost the exact same population, very close in size, climate, landscape, nearly identical, okay? The same exact number of hockey players, roughly, and I know that's a hard thing to go out and get, but when you do your research, like Todd Woodcraft, trusting everything that you get online, it's about 67,000 people playing hockey in both countries, all right? And then the best part, most Finnish people that came to the United States settled either in northern Minnesota or the upper peninsula of Michigan, which is right next to northern Minnesota, okay? So 1 out of 6 Finnish people that have come to the United States live in northern Minnesota, where I'm from. My grandpa used to tell a pretty good joke. He said, "What's big and yellow and has 30 fins?" And I'd say, like, I don't really know what kind of shark has 30 fins. He'd go, "A school bus from northern Minnesota." All right, so it's just such a part of the culture in Minnesota, and honestly, it's not much a part of the culture in the rest of the country, other than that little nook of the state of Michigan. We have saunas all over the place, and I have found out, like, that's earned some credibility with a few people that I've met here to say that we have that many saunas. But we have a city called Finland, and we have the only bandy rink in the United States. So if I don't have you yet, I'm probably not going to get you. But Minnesota is the United States Finland, all right? And as I'll get to, not quite yet, but I'll tease you with this, we're kind of hockey cousins. We're not quite brothers. There's enough differences to not make us brothers, but we're kind of hockey cousins, okay? And in a way, even though we're in the United States, there are aspects of our hockey that we have more in common with Finland than we do with the rest of our country. Not in good or bad, but just kind of interesting. Like I said, we're not quite brothers, but we're cousins. I'll get to that. But first, I want to talk about hockey in our country, which I'm very proud of. As you heard, I'm on the USA Hockey. I'm actually no longer on the board of directors as of the next upcoming board meeting, but I'd been on the board of directors for 9 years. It was a privilege to serve hockey in our country. As I mentioned earlier, one of the key points in my life for hockey, and I think for most Americans involved in hockey that were alive then, was the Miracle on Ice back in 1980. And so I'm as proud as I am of being in Minnesota, I'm just as proud of the country I'm in, obviously, the United States. And hockey has exploded in our country, literally. The numbers of kids playing hockey has grown significantly. Where these kids play hockey has grown significantly. It used to be really a northern tier sport, played in Minnesota, played in Michigan, played in Massachusetts, and a few other states that border those 3 big states. In fact, the 1980 Olympic team, that's such a big deal in our country, the Miracle on Ice, we beat Soviet Union, beat Finland, won the gold medal. Players were from 4 states. That's it. The entire roster came from 4 of the 50 states. I believe the US team playing here, players are from 12 states. And states that might not mean something to you, but states that 40 years ago you would have never guessed that they'd be producing any hockey players, much less hockey players at a really high level. And credit for that goes to USA Hockey and to the National Hockey League. They have been very mindful of trying to go out and grow this wonderful sport. And as I saw at the start here, at the intro with Calais and what they're trying to do in some of these new countries, and I think I saw a Portugal jacket back there. You know, at one time, probably a younger version of me would think like, oh, they're not going to have hockey in Portugal. And now I think like, you know what, I wouldn't be surprised if the best hockey player in the world in 30 years is from Portugal. That's how much belief I have in this sport and how it can grow. So hockey in our country is definitely doing the right thing. In fact, if you're following the NHL and the Stanley Cup playoffs right now, the 4 remaining teams all come from 4 parts of our country that didn't have NHL hockey a generation ago. People back then wouldn't have thought it would work, and now clearly it's not only working, it's working really well and inspiring kids from all parts of our country to play hockey. But as I said, hockey in many parts of the country, especially the newest parts of our country, the newest hockey playing parts of our country, is a bit dissimilar to how it was played in the Tampere of Minnesota, Duluth, where I grew up. So first, let me kind of set how I see hockey in the rest of our country and how it's played. It's very commercialized, and it starts with the ownership model of the ice arenas. So the teams in the Final Four of the NHL playoffs are Vegas, Dallas, Florida, and Carolina. It's spectacular that that's happening. They have built a hockey culture in those areas, but it's done first and foremost, and we know our sport It's so facility-oriented. These facilities are privately owned. And then everything kind of comes from the nature of how is your rink owned, okay? So it leads to private club teams, academies, people making money off of hockey, paid coaches, in some cases very highly paid coaches, extensive focus on travel. So what I like to say, if you lined up all the players, all the families that want to play hockey, and we use the word crazy, the families that want to spend the most is who hockey, especially competitive hockey, can get calibrated to in most parts of our country, especially the parts of our country where they're newer to the game, okay? And then along with that just comes a whole lot of byproducts of it, results of it. There's a significant early identification. 10-year-old elite teams. 10-year-old elite teams. I've got very disappointed very excited that the city of Las Vegas is now doing quite well with getting new kids to play hockey. Love that. What I became very disappointed about was their leaders have a 10-year-old elite girls team. And their schedule requires 8 plane trips. I don't think we're going to maximize the growth of any kind of hockey, in this case 10-year-old girl hockey, in Las Vegas, if that's what's required to see yourself as a competitive little 10-year-old hockey player, okay? And then when I say minimal widespread cultural impact, and I highlight that here because it's going to be part of my, my discussion later, is up until the NHL, most of these kids aren't playing in front of other players. They're not playing in front of younger players. They're not playing in front of members of their community. They're not inspiring the next generation of kids for the most part. I'm generalizing here for the sake of the story, okay? But there aren't a lot of people getting excited about watching the 14-year-olds or the 16-year-olds or the 18-year-olds play hockey in these communities. Okay? So that'll make more sense in a little bit. And I'm not the only one that's noticed this. Victor Hedman, and I realize this might be a faux pas because he's from Sweden, but for the sake of this presentation, please just kind of pretend that he's from Finland. Maybe pretend like he's the other Sebastian Aho, so he's the Finnish Sebastian Aho. But read this, and I'll read it because I think this is important. He noticed, as an NHL hockey player from Sweden, for most of my childhood, I more or less played with the same friends from my neighborhood. I hear stories about youth hockey in America and Canada and kids jumping around from team to team. There's all kinds of travel teams you have to try out for and expensive camps and coaches to impress. But in Sweden, it's more of a family atmosphere. There are difficult levels, but you are never caught. When people talk about Swedish hockey, they often mention the chemistry of the players. But really, it's a total philosophy of community that starts when you're young. And what I've learned a lot, and a lot of it's come from Bob Mancini and others at USA Hockey, I have attended a number of presentations given by Finnish hockey leaders, Swedish hockey leaders. I've read even more about it, watched stuff online. Sweden and Finland, from this standpoint, are very similar. So allow my faux pas of bringing Victor Hedman into a presentation that I'm giving in Finland, okay? So in addition to being very similar in other ways, Finland and Sweden are Finland and Minnesota are hockey cousins. Okay? In many ways, we have more in common with Finland than we do with Las Vegas when it comes to how does a young person play hockey. All right? So much so that Ryan McDonough, another great NHL defenseman, another guy that won the Stanley Cup with Victor Hedman at Tampa Bay, said almost something similar in an article in The Athletic, and I'll read it. In the NHL, you play with guys from all over the world coming up, different routes, juniors, college, major juniors, European leagues. For me, it was fun to hear their reactions that I played high school hockey, and I'm going to emphasize this, and lived at home all through my NHL draft year. It speaks volumes to the sport in the state of Minnesota. You hear about guys leaving home at 14 or 15, going to different leagues. It's a pretty unique setup to stay at home. The longest bus ride is 40 minutes. You appreciate it more in the years it was such a special time in my life. That's Ryan McDonough, who won the Stanley Cup with Victor Hedman. He's been an NHL All-Star. Not quite Victor Hedman, but a 1,000-game NHLer, okay? So he's describing Minnesota, and he sees the rest of our country in much the same way that Victor Hedman did. So what is hockey like in Minnesota? And I think about this a lot. I'm part of a group in Minnesota that I'll get to that is recognizing that we need to be people in Minnesota need to be a little more aware that we can't just take this for granted, that hockey like this in Minnesota will continue forever. But what is it like in Minnesota? And it's come down to these 4 words for me personally. It's affordable, it's accessible, it's local, and then I'll get back to this word, it's inspiring. And that's the part that I want to really focus on here. It's inspiring. But it starts with our rink ownership model. Like I've learned in Finland, our rinks are entirely, with the exception of 1 2-sheet privately owned ice facility, are entirely municipally owned, publicly owned. They're either owned by a community, by the county, the little government jurisdiction that they're in. It might be owned by a public school, might be owned by a nonprofit youth hockey association. Most are owned by the community that they're in. My understanding is very similar to how rinks are owned in Finland and Sweden, not very similar to how rinks are owned in Vegas and Carolina and Dallas and Florida. And then everything comes from rink ownership. Nonprofit, board-run, volunteer board-run youth hockey clubs. Our model in Minnesota says you have to play where you live, okay? They feed high school teams. You play for the same team, like Victor Hedman said. Frequently, your teammates at 6 are your teammates at 16. Always playing for the same jersey. We actually still have the bulk of our coaches are volunteers, and those that get paid are lightly paid, not paid much at all, okay? As with anything, some are good, some aren't, probably find that everywhere. But because they're volunteers, the cost is kept down. All of these things keep the price down. But what it also does, or a byproduct of this rink ownership model, is we don't have early identification, or we have much less identification. We have 150 associations in the state of Minnesota, and they feed 150 high school teams. So it's more of a rectangle. It's not a pyramid. All right, and that is atypical for how it's done in the rest of the country. And I do want to give a call out to 2 other states, North Dakota and Wisconsin. They both border Minnesota. They also have a structure that's very similar to the Minnesota model. So it's not entirely exclusive to Minnesota, but they have a structure that's similar to that. But what gets me most jacked up when I talk about this, I do get excited about it. It's low cost and your bus ride is whatever. And you live at home, which I think is very valuable, but we've normalized sending 14-year-olds away from home in our country. But you live at home. All that's good. But what I get most excited about is that this model is inspiring. It wasn't intentional. It wasn't, somebody didn't sit there and say, let's create this so that we can create this inspiring model. But if you find out, why did you get your 5-year-old into hockey instead of basketball? In our state, it's because all of these teams inspire the kids in their local community. So we all know Connor McDavid is the best player in the world. The NHL team in Minnesota is the Minnesota Wild. Their best player is Kirill Kaprizov. He's a really exciting player. And then every single town has their best player in it. So if you go to a particular town, this town here is Moorhead, okay, that's their high school star player. If you ask one of those kids that's at a Moorhead high school game, who are your favorite players, you likely will get an answer. I love McDavid, Kaprizov, and then fill in the blank with whoever the best 16-year-old is in your town. And that leads to so many wonderful things. It inspires the kids to be great players. It inspires them to want to be on that team and eventually be great and perhaps get to the NHL. But it also leads to parents saying, my 6-year-old is going to wear skates instead of basketball shoes. And I don't care how good of a hockey coach you are. If a 6-year-old kid chooses basketball, it doesn't matter. The most important thing to you being a great coach is that there's players to coach. And that's what I want to stress to people about the model in Minnesota, it's not the coaches are any better. It's not that the parents are less crazy. They're super crazy. It's none of those things. It's that we have a model that tells more parents to get your kid into hockey instead of into basketball. Okay? So I've got a video here. Don't play it quite yet. This video is a young man named Noah Cates when he was at Stillwater High School. Stillwater is a public high school. Community called Stillwater. It's about 25,000 people. It's a bit in the Minneapolis-St. Paul metro area, which is the Helsinki of Minnesota. So this is his high school team playing another high school team. All of his teammates that you see on here, or most of his teammates, were his lifetime teammates growing up in Stillwater. They started hockey together at 5. Now he's on the high school team. This particular game, the winner moves on to the state tournament. The state tournament in Minnesota, which is the 8 best high schools, come together. They play in the arena that the Minnesota Wild play in. It's a festival similar to this. What I see here with the World Championships, only it's a little more youth-oriented, so not as much alcohol involved, but a lot of pride, a lot of people walking around. You can just feel it when you're in town. So the winner of this game moves on to that tournament. That's a big deal. And while this game is being played, there's 7 other games like this one going around throughout the country, or throughout the state, with those teams ready to move on to this tournament, okay? So this is a bunch of 17-year-olds from one area playing a bunch of 17-year-olds from the other area. So I'd just like you to watch this video and just kind of make note of what you're thinking as you're watching the video. Go ahead. That was Noah's last year of high school hockey, 2017, as I said, in Stillwater, Minnesota. That was Stillwater's first trip to the state tournament, I believe, in 24 years. So it wasn't a common thing for that team, for that school, to make it to the state tournament. Noah was one of the better players in the state, so much so that a few months after you saw that, he'd be drafted by the Philadelphia Flyers. A few years after that, he went and played college hockey, which I work for. In particular, he went up to Minnesota Duluth, which is a school in the town that I grew up in. Won a national championship there. Pretty cool, he did it with his brother, who was also on that Stillwater team. So that's Noah and Jackson Cates winning the national championship. He represented our country, played in the 2019 World Juniors, played in the 2020 Olympics. Was it 2022? He played in the Olympics that was in China. Then after a 4-year NCAA career, immediately debuted in the National Hockey League with the Philadelphia Flyers. It was pretty cool. His first game was actually played against the Minnesota Wild in St. Paul. And when you saw him come out for his rookie lap, it was filled with people from Stillwater, people wearing Stillwater jerseys when Noah Cates came out to make his NHL debut. And now 2 years later, he's one of the Philadelphia Flyers' best players. A two-way forward, very well thought of. And if you go to Stillwater, it's very likely that people will say my favorite players are Connor McDavid, Kirill Kaprizov, and Noah Cates. And if you ask an 11-year-old kid, hey, why did you start playing hockey? And his mom said, well, she wants me to be the next Noah Cates. Very well thought of. Very well thought of. One of 67 Minnesotans in the NHL this past year. The most of any state, the most ever of any state. 67 Minnesotans. More than any other state, more than any province other than Ontario in Canada. So that's Noah Cates, one of 67 kids inspiring in whatever community they're from in Minnesota. I think a better part of Minnesota is how much it's embraced girls and women's hockey. As I said earlier, 1 out of 3 women that play college hockey from the United States are Minnesotans. And one of the best is Taylor Heisey. So Taylor Heisey is from Red Wing, and actually, even to add to the story, she's from even a smaller town near Red Wing called Lake City. Red Wing is about an hour, a little more than an hour away from the large metro area, so it's a small little town. And she started out by playing in an outdoor-only league. And then how they do it there is if you're in Lake City, they have a hockey program up till age 10, and then the Lake City kids go on and play at Red Wing, which is the neighboring town, which is the larger town. Okay, so she's from Red Wing. A side note, this will make Bob Mancini happy, she was a competitive basketball player as well until she was 13. So she's a multi-sport athlete, seasonal, but even within the winter season, she was playing basketball and hockey until she was 13, and then she chose hockey as her winter sport, okay? Stayed in Red Wing, similar story. Her teammates at 6 were her teammates at 16. Her jersey at 6 was her jersey at 16. Smaller town, not a tradition-rich hockey town, but that didn't prevent her from being called winning Ms. Hockey, which is given to the best female high school player in the state. From there, she went to the University of Minnesota, one of the best college hockey teams in women's hockey, although Princeton beat them recently. Not only did she do well at the University of Minnesota, she won the Patty Kazmaier Award as the best women's college hockey player in the country. She was the best. Just a few months ago, she was one of the best players on the team that won gold at the Women's World's Championship. So Taylor Heisey, if you were in Red Wing, would be at the end of the sentence with Connor McDavid, Kirill Kaprizov, and Taylor Heisey. Okay. So Taylor Heisey and Noah Cates played for one team their entire childhood. One jersey, one group of teammates. I'm generalizing and simplifying. Sure, some families move and some quit playing and things happen, okay? But one team. They attended their community public schools. They lived at home their entire childhood. And I think we have an issue, some disagree, in our country. We have normalized sending your kid away from home now as young as 13. They lived at home their entire childhood. They did not spend much on hockey. Now, 2,300 euros is a lot of money. But relative to what's required, if you want to be a competitive, reach the NHL, reach the women's national team type player, 2,300 euros is not a lot. And then as I have begun to focus and why I think it's so critical to share this story and to preserve it and to make it better, is how many kids did they inspire in their hometowns? And because this is the model, the Taylor Heiseys and the Noah Cates of the other towns, how many kids are they inspiring? All right, so I asked you to watch this video and think about what you're seeing in there, and I'm sure Todd Woodcroft was back there and talking about why that D-man was too low on the puck and why they were pushing this way instead of that way and how we all watch our video, okay? How I watch this video and what I see if I'm gonna break this video down is I put myself in the shoes of all of the 5, 6, and 7-year-olds, and that building was filled with them, that have Stillwater jerseys on, that look at Noah Cates as a teammate. He just happens to be 8 years older than them, okay? And what happened to them on that day and how they got motivated and how they wanted to be the next Noah Cates and they wanted to lead Stillwater to the state tournament. And now they see Noah Cates doing exceptionally well in the NHL. And how important that is that these young people are aware of these local heroes. McDavid, Kaprizov, Noah Cates. Lives on the same street, shops at the same grocery store, goes to the same school. And how critically important that is. So now watch this as though you're a 5, 6, or 7-year-old wearing the same jersey. You have a hockey game tomorrow, and you're watching your neighbor do this. And this has been going on for a long time. This model of hockey, it's like our country's constitution. It was instituted 75 years ago. You have to play where you live, and then you play for your high school. And this is a pretty cool photo. The young man in this photo is actually one of Coach Woodcroft's recruits. He's going to be at Vermont next year. He led his team, Prior Lake, another community, public high school team, to their first ever state tournament bid. This was a few years ago. In his first game, he scores 5 goals. The most goals ever scored in a state tournament game, with the exception of one of the best Americans ever, John Mayasich, Eveleth High School, class of 1951. John Mayasich was at that game and said, I have to go meet that guy. So in this photo is John Mayasich, arguably one of the best American hockey players of all time, shaking hands with the young guy who almost broke his record of most goals scored in a state tournament game. And they grew up in the same model of hockey. Affordable, accessible, inspirational. So this is why I feel convicted to tell this. My job with College Hockey Inc. allows me to get to know how youth hockey, how girls hockey, boys hockey is done, definitely in the United States. I know it pretty well in Canada, and I'm getting to know how it's done in Europe as well. So I realize, and I didn't realize this up until I got my job with Minnesota Hockey, it is different. And because it's not profit-driven, or I should say not as profit-driven, we have some private coaches. Parents will send their kids to a skating instructor. You might have a shooting instructor. You might have an inside edge coach. You might have an outside edge coach. We have that too, okay? But the foundation of the hockey is not for profit. In most ways, I think that makes it better. What they're not as good at is marketing themselves, okay? Somebody who is in it to make money is going to do a better job at selling what they have because it's their job. So yeah, we have 67,000 hockey players. That's 67,000 potential customers. And we have no shortage of parents willing to do whatever they think it takes so that their daughter or son can reach the highest level possible, even if it doesn't make sense, okay? And even in Minnesota, and I was part of this crowd, they're not fully aware. People don't sit there and obsess with this information like I am. They don't have a job that allows them to listen to speakers, attend events like this, get paid to do research and uncover and discover this. They just sign their kid up for hockey. They think it's fun. They can't even put this stuff into words, and they go about their business. And if they happen to get a phone call or an email or an inquiry from somebody that has a better version, or at least they're saying they do, they're all ears. And how often does this happen? All the time. This is a verbatim, cut and pasted email forwarded to me yesterday, sent to this person yesterday, to families in Minnesota, from somebody starting a AAA 13U team in Des Moines, Iowa. Des Moines, Iowa is a city about 4.5 hours away from Minneapolis, St. Paul, which is the largest city in Minnesota. And so here's their marketing tactic. Minnesota, North Dakota, and parts of Wisconsin primarily play community-based hockey, but just about everywhere else in the U.S. plays Tier 1, at least at the high levels, okay? The biggest difference is visibility, okay, for your 13-year-old. Come play for this team if he's at a high level and he wants to be noticed. This is the first year that USA Hockey is hosting a U13 national championship tournament. So just sending this out blindly to families in Minnesota to have them send their 13-year-old away from home to play for a more expensive, less inspiring team and not live in their house. And so I feel like, how is this better for hockey in Minnesota? Okay, but even more importantly, how does this grow hockey in Des Moines? And Iowa has a pretty cool little hockey thing going on. It's not as much a part of the culture as Minnesota, but they've got hockey in Iowa. One of the goalies on the world team, on our U.S. team here, is from Iowa. Okay, but it's not as big as it should be. And if you're going to grow it, I would think the teams in Iowa should serve the players in Iowa. But instead their coach, no, we want to be good. We want to win this national championship. We're going to do it better if we just go up. We don't have to convince everybody in Minnesota. We just have to convince 18 of them to send their best 13-year-olds down here so they can win a national championship. So this is the threat. And even though there are more Minnesotans in the NHL than ever before, and even though the difference between Minnesota and the next state, the gap is bigger than it's ever been, there are more Minnesota families sending their players away because they are getting information like this and acting upon it. So what is Minnesota hockey doing? And this gets back to the thank you for Finland. There is a group that has been formed. We're very fortunate that the NHL team in Minnesota is a big believer in this model. They understand that their team benefits from all of this community hockey and people being so passionate and proud of the community hockey. It funnels right up to Kirill Kaprizov and the Minnesota Wild. That they are organizing a group made up mostly of high school coaches, both girls and boys teams, to do almost what College Hockey Inc. does. And I'm helping them put this together in terms of being an advocacy organization to go out and make sure that people in your state know how special you have it, and that if you lose it, you're not going to get it back. And frequently, they reference Finland and Sweden, all right? Frequently, they reference Finland and Sweden. You probably don't even know it. So Minnesota now, moving forward, is going to try to combat those emails. And those emails are constant. Whether it's an academy in Rhode Island, a youth team all across the country, whatever it might be. So what's the goal? The goal at those 6-year-olds watching Noah Cates, or all the girls down in Red Wing inspired by Taylor and Noah, that they believe just as much that staying in their community, living in their childhood home throughout their entire childhood, will not only not hurt their development as a hockey player, but will help their development as a hockey player. Because of those 67 Minnesotans in the NHL, of the 1/3 of college hockey players who are from Minnesota, this isn't an aberration how Taylor and Noah did it. This is how the vast majority of them do it. There are 4 Minnesotans on the team that you'll see here today. All 4 of them went to bed in their childhood home during their last year of high school. Sammy Walker, Dylan Sandberg, Scott Perunovich, Nick Perbix. NHL players lived in their childhood house their entire childhood. 4 different public schools, 4 different communities that they're from. Okay? That is how the majority of them do it. So our goal is that someday, Taylor or Noah, when they're 80 years old, go down to shake hands with some little girl or boy or some young woman or man that just ripped it up at the state tournament during the 150th anniversary of this version of hockey. And that's part of why when Aaron said, would you want to come over and talk about this? I thought, yeah, I think I do, actually. I don't know if I would have said yes 5 years ago, but I will now, all right? So even though I'm on vacation, I do want to get in a little work while I'm here. College Hockey Inc., something I'm just as passionate about college hockey as I am hockey in Minnesota and hockey in my country. I believe by making hockey better in Minnesota, we're helping to make hockey better in the United States. So I'm really about college hockey, hockey in the US, hockey in Minnesota. College hockey is as good as it's ever been, both women's and men's. If you want to look at the impact they have on the highest levels of play, let's just take the National Hockey League, for example. 1/3 of guys that play in the National Hockey League played college hockey. A generation ago, it was about 1 out of 5. 2 generations ago, it was about 1 out of 10. And it's becoming more European than it ever has been. When I started with college hockey, there was 30, this goes back to 2003. I'm sorry, when I started, that 2003 should say 2013. There were 40 European men. Now, there are 133 European men. And how much has it grown on the women's side? I couldn't even find stats from 10 years ago. Now there's 61 European women playing college hockey, okay? So it's wonderful on the ice, but off the ice, and Kara will attest to this, Todd will attest to this, 98%, which is obviously almost everybody that plays women's college hockey will get their degree, okay? 92%, so everybody but the goalies that plays men's college hockey will get their degree. all right? And that includes Noah Cates and Taylor Heisey and almost all of their teammates. All right, so one final time, Kiitos from Minnesota. Appreciate the inspiration that you probably don't even realize that you're providing with the group of people back there, trying to make sure that our hockey not only continues to thrive, but gets better. Thank you. You want me to stay up here for questions?
Mike, stay with me for a second.
Yeah.
Great.
No problem.
Mike, we've got to talk. Okay, there's so many parallels with the same issues that we are facing with basketball in the UK at the moment. So really inspiring. You talked about affordable, accessible, local, and inspiring as your motto, if you want. That definitely inspired me. So thank you very much for that.
And before I want to also say, it's not perfect. There are issues there. Usually the root of the issues are crazy parents and people trying to profit off of dreams, okay? So I don't want this to sound like it's all, and what I've learned here in the conversations I've had the past 2 days by talking to people in this room, specifically from Finland, I came in here thinking everything was perfect here. While I'm like talking to Puri, there are issues here too. So I don't want it to sound like it's all, it's all rainbows and stuff.
Absolutely, great. Right, so maybe time for 1 or 2 questions before we go for lunch? That's the magic word, eh? Go on, yeah, thank you very much. Again, if you can, just give us your name and where you're coming from before you give us the question.
Thanks for the great presentation. I'm Matti from Finland, but second home, Grand Rapids, Minnesota.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I play high school there.
Yeah.
So very touching
Jack Pert. Know his name.
Yeah.
Jack Pert.
Yeah, personally. Question is that, do you see other states adopting the Minnesota system and how people are receiving the system in other states?
Most importantly, I've never lived anywhere else in the United States. I actually did live in Germany for a little while, but I never lived anywhere else. So I don't know if it's fair for me to comment, but I would say I highly doubt it because it starts with the rink ownership model. And when you have rinks that are privately owned, which is it's not a negative. I mean, if we're going to have hockey in some of these newer areas, communities aren't going to invest in money-losing rinks. Okay, like fortunately in Minnesota, and it's good fortune, the taxpayers in Minnesota, probably like people here in Finland, they mentally think a rink, an ice arena, is like a playground. And people don't look at a playground with swing sets and a merry-go-round and teeter-tots with the expectation that it has to make money. And people in Minnesota and in northern Minnesota don't look at an ice arena like it has to make money. They're okay with tax money subsidizing the arena, which means they're okay with tax money subsidizing our sport. But in the newer areas, that's not the case. So the rinks, if there's going to be rinks, they need to be privately built and privately owned. That's just a fact, a cultural fact. So therefore, the intent is not going to be entirely different, but it's going to be noticeably different. And it's not going to allow for a community-based high school model to thrive at an inspirational level. But I want to, so my answer, long answer to your question is, I would say it's much more likely that Minnesota becomes like the commercialized model than the commercialized areas become like Minnesota.
Yeah, that will be my second question. So thanks for
Yep,
answers.
thank you.
Thank you.